painted map lies beneath flickering candlelight. Rivers curl across faded parchment in blue ink. Mountains rise in careful black strokes. Tiny castles stand where generations of kings once ruled. And in the silence between the crackle of the flame and the whisper of the wind outside, the whole continent seems asleep. Yet every line on this map marks a border that men fought and died to draw. Every castle carries the memory of ancient banners. Every road remembers armies whose names have long since faded into dust. Tonight's journey is not through a single war or a single dynasty, but through the long history of the great houses of Westeros themselves. As you listen, let the noise of the day drift away and allow the old kingdoms to emerge slowly from the darkness. If you have traveled these roads with me before, quietly note which night of the journey this is for you. If you are new here, let this be night one. Together we will move from the icy north to the deserts of Dorne, following the families whose choices shaped thousands of years of history. The wind seems to move across the parchment itself. It passes over the wall in the far north, over Winterfell and White Harbor, over the mountains of the moon and the green fields of the Reach, over the golden heights of Casterly Rock and the broken towers of Old Harrenhal. It reaches the warm waters of Sunspear and the lonely Iron Islands before fading into the narrow sea. As it moves, the banners of the great houses rise one by one from the map. The direwolf, the falcon and moon, the lion, the trout, the crowned stag, the golden rose, the kraken, the sun and spear, and above them all, the three-headed dragon that eventually bound the kingdoms together beneath a single crown. Why did only a handful of noble families become the great houses of Westeros when thousands of lesser houses existed across the realm? The answer begins long before Aegon Targaryen landed at the mouth of the Blackwater. It begins in an age when the Seven Kingdoms truly were seven kingdoms, and sometimes even more than seven. Before the Iron Throne existed, Westeros was divided among independent rulers. The kings of winter ruled from Winterfell. The kings of the Rock sat in Casterly Rock. The Storm Kings governed from Storm's End. The Reach belonged to House Gardner. The Vale answered to House Arryn. Dorne followed House Martell. The Riverlands changed hands repeatedly, often suffering beneath foreign conquerors. Power in Westeros was never measured by noble blood alone. Geography mattered, armies mattered, ancient traditions mattered. The north stretched across nearly half the continent, giving House Stark enormous territory, even when its population remained comparatively small. The Reach possessed fertile fields, capable of feeding vast armies. The Westerlands sat upon immense gold deposits that filled the treasuries of House Lannister. The Vale enjoyed natural defenses that made invasion extraordinarily difficult. Long before dragons arrived, the foundations of power were already taking shape. The old histories tell of hundreds of kings whose names survive only in fragments. The first men crossed into Westeros thousands of years before Aegon's conquest, entering through the arm of Dorne before the children of the forest shattered that land bridge. Wars followed, forests burned, weirwoods were cut down. Eventually the first men and the children made peace through the pact on the Isle of Faces. Centuries later came the Long Night, remembered in legend as a darkness that covered the world. Whether every detail of those ancient stories is true remains uncertain, but their influence upon Westeros cannot be overstated. Even thousands of years later, great houses still traced their legitimacy back to heroes who supposedly lived in those distant ages. The arrival of the Andals transformed the balance of power again. Crossing the narrow sea with steel weapons and the faith of the Seven, Andal warlords landed first in the Vale. Their most celebrated conqueror was Artus Arryn, remembered as the Falcon Knight. According to tradition, he defeated the first men kings of the Vale and established House Arryn as the dominant power in the region. From there, Andal culture spread across much of southern Westeros. New castles rose, new dynasties emerged. The worship of the Seven replaced older gods across vast territories, yet some regions resisted. The North remained loyal to the old gods. The Iron Islands kept their drowned god. Dorne developed its own distinct traditions. Even before the Targaryens arrived, Westeros was already a continent of competing identities. The title Great House carried more meaning than simple wealth. These families sat at the center of entire kingdoms. Lesser houses swore oaths to them. Marriages connected them to rival dynasties. Their victories became history. Their defeats became cautionary tales. House Manderly ruled White Harbor. House Karstark controlled lands in the north. House Royce maintained ancient authority in the Vale. House Hightower dominated Old Town, and House Ironwood rivaled the Martells in Dorne. Many of these families possessed immense power, yet they remained beneath the ruling dynasties that shaped their respective regions. Why did some ancient houses vanish, while others endured for thousands of years? Consider House Gardner. Before the conquest, they ruled the Reach from Highgarden and claimed descent from the legendary Garth Greenhand. For generations, their authority seemed unshakable. Or consider House Durrandon, whose kings ruled the Stormlands from Storm's End, and whose history stretched deep into legend. Both families appeared permanent. Both commanded loyalty, armies, and castles. Yet neither survives as a ruling dynasty in the age of the War of the Five Kings. History in Westeros often feels stable when viewed from nearby, but across centuries, it behaves like a river, quietly changing course until the landscape looks entirely different. Perhaps no family understood this better than House Stark. Long before dragons flew above Westeros, the Starks were already ancient. Their origins disappear into the mists of myth. The traditional founder of their line was Bran the Builder, a legendary figure credited with constructing Winterfell, aiding in the raising of the wall, and helping build Storm's End. Historians question how much of this can be taken literally. Yet even skeptical maesters acknowledge that House Stark is among the oldest dynasties in the known world. By the time recorded history becomes somewhat reliable, the Starks had already ruled the North for countless generations. Why does House Stark occupy such a unique place in the memory of Westeros? The answer lies partly in the nature of the North itself. Vast forests stretched between distant settlements. Winters could last for years. Travel was difficult, even in favorable seasons. Survival required resilience. The kings of winter spent centuries consolidating their authority through warfare. They defeated the Marsh Kings of the Neck. They fought the Barrow Kings. They clashed repeatedly with the Red Kings of House Bolton. Each victory expanded Stark influence, and strengthened Winterfell's position as the heart of the North. The struggle against House Bolton became one of the defining rivalries of Northern history. The Boltons ruled from the Dreadfort and were feared throughout the region. Ancient stories claim that Bolton lords once flayed defeated enemies and wore their skins as trophies. Whether every tale is true is impossible to know, but the reputation endured for centuries. The Starks and Boltons fought numerous wars before the Dreadfort finally accepted Stark supremacy. The significance of that victory reached beyond simple conquest. By bringing their most dangerous rival beneath Winterfell's authority, the Starks moved closer to unifying the North under a single banner. Winterfell itself reflected the long confidence of its rulers. Unlike many castles that occupied strategic hills or coastal cliffs, Winterfell stood above natural hot springs. Warm water flowed through hidden channels beneath its walls, keeping parts of the castle heated even during brutal winters. Massive curtain walls enclosed godswoods, towers, halls, and courtyards accumulated across centuries. Generations of Stark rulers added new structures as their power grew. The result was less a single castle than a living record of Northern history. Every stone seemed to remember a different age. As night settles over the map and the candle burns lower, your gaze lingers on Winterfell. Thousands of years before Robert Baratheon rode through its gates. Thousands of years before Eddard Stark became Warden of the North. Thousands of years before dragons crossed the sky. The castle already stood there, enduring snowstorms, invasions, dynastic struggles, and the passing of entire civilizations. And as the wind drifts across the parchment toward the mountains of the moon, another ancient dynasty waits beyond the horizon. The falcons of House Arryn are watching from the heights of the Vale, and their story is only beginning. Why did one of the most isolated kingdoms in Westeros repeatedly find itself at the center of the realm's greatest political upheavals? The question follows you as the northern forests fade behind and steep mountains rise ahead. The Vale of Arryn is one of the most defensible regions on the continent. To the east lies the Narrow Sea. To the west stand the Mountains of the Moon. Narrow passes twist through harsh terrain where small forces can hold back much larger armies. Yet despite this isolation, House Arryn has repeatedly shaped the fate of kings and kingdoms. The history of House Arryn begins not with the first men, but with the Andals. Thousands of years before Aegon's conquest, Andal warlords crossed the Narrow Sea, carrying steel weapons and the faith of the Seven. Among them was the legendary Arys Arryn, remembered as the Falcon Knight. The old tales describe him riding upon a giant falcon as he conquered the Vale, though most Meisters treat this as symbolic rather than literal. What remains undisputed is that House Arryn established itself as the dominant Andal dynasty in the region. Unlike many southern houses that mixed First Men and Andal ancestry over centuries, the Arryns took pride in preserving a comparatively pure Andal lineage. Their seat became one of the most remarkable castles in the known world. The Eyrie stands high above the Valley of Arryn upon the Giant's Lance, a mountain whose snowy peak dominates the landscape. Reaching the castle requires passing through the Gates of the Moon and ascending a series of smaller fortifications known as Stone, Snow, and Sky. Supplies often had to be carried by mule and winch. During winter, the castle could become inaccessible altogether, yet its height made it nearly impossible to assault directly. Generations of Arryn rulers slept peacefully, knowing that armies below could do little but stare upward. The Arryn kings ruled the Vale long before dragons appeared in Westeros. Their banners flew over Goldtown, Runestone, Heart's Home, and dozens of lesser lordships. Houses Royce, Corbray, Waynwood, Hunter, and Belmore became among their most powerful vassals. Some of these families traced their ancestry to the first men and remained proud of traditions older than the Andal invasion itself. The Bronze Kings of House Royce in particular once rivaled the Arryns for control of the region. Over time, however, the Falcon Banner became the symbol that united the Vale. When Aegon Targaryen launched his conquest in 1 AC, the Vale was ruled by Queen Regent Shera Arryn on behalf of her young son, King Ronal Arryn. According to the histories, Shera attempted diplomacy before war. One account claims she offered marriage alliances. Another suggests she explored negotiations designed to preserve her son's independence. None succeeded. When Visenya Targaryen flew Vhagar directly into the Aerys' inner courtyard, the matter was effectively settled. The young king reportedly became fascinated by the dragon. The Vale submitted soon afterward, sparing itself the devastation that befell other kingdoms. Centuries later, House Arryn would once again stand at the center of history through a man whose influence far exceeded the size of his kingdom. Jon Arryn served as Lord of the Eyrie and Warden of the East during the reign of Aerys II Targaryen. More importantly, he became the foster father of two boys who would reshape the realm, Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon. In the halls of the Eyrie, the future Lord of Winterfell and the future king forged a friendship that would endure into adulthood. Few could have guessed that those bonds would eventually help topple a dynasty nearly 3 centuries old. Why did Robert's rebellion truly begin? Officially, the crisis emerged after Prince Rhaegar Targaryen disappeared with Lyanna Stark, and after King Aerys II executed Rickard Stark and Brandon Stark in King's Landing. Yet the decisive moment came when Aerys demanded that Jon Arryn surrender his wards for execution. The command placed him in an impossible position. Obedience meant betraying Eddard and Robert. Refusal meant rebellion against the Iron Throne. Jon Arryn chose rebellion. In that single decision, one Lord of the Vale helped ignite a war that changed Westeros forever. The banners of the Vale marched beside the North and the Stormlands throughout the conflict. Battles erupted across the continent. Lords chose sides. Ancient loyalties fractured. When Robert Baratheon emerged victorious and claimed the Iron Throne in 283 AC, Jon Arryn became Hand of the King. For nearly 15 years, he served as the kingdom's chief administrator. Many chroniclers later described this period as one of relative stability. Yet beneath the calm surface, political tensions quietly accumulated, waiting for the moment when the old hand's guiding influence would disappear. The death of Jon Arryn at the beginning of A Game of Thrones carries enormous significance precisely because of the house he represented. His final investigations led him toward the truth about the children of Queen Cersei Lannister. His widow, Lysa Arryn, concealed critical information while isolating herself in the Vale. Young Robert Arryn inherited the Eyrie, though real authority became increasingly contested. The Vale remained powerful, yet its influence grew strangely indirect. While armies clashed elsewhere, The Knights of the Vale often waited behind mountain passes, their strength largely preserved while other regions bled. As the wind leaves the heights of the giant's lance, it begins descending toward a land where rivers replace mountains. Countless streams merge into larger waterways until they become the mighty Trident. Here, unlike the Vale or the North, geography offered little protection. Armies marched through constantly. Kings invaded repeatedly. Castles changed hands. The Riverlands became the battlefield of Westeros long before the War of the Five Kings. And among all the houses that fought over this region, one question remains especially intriguing. How did House Tully, neither the richest, nor the oldest, nor the strongest family of the Riverlands, become its ruling dynasty? To understand the answer, you must first understand the curse of geography. The Riverlands occupied the center of Westeros. To the west lie the Westerlands. To the east stands the Vale. The north borders them above. The Reach and Stormlands press from the south. Unlike the north, they possess no vast wilderness for protection. Unlike the Vale, they have no mountain fortress. Their fertile lands attracted conquerors again and again. For centuries, the Riverlands were ruled by outsiders. Storm Kings expanded northward from Storm's End. Ironborn raiders crossed the Sunset Sea and seized territory. Rival river kings rose and fell. By the time Aegon began his conquest, the region was dominated by House Hoare of the Iron Islands. Harren the Black had spent years constructing Harrenhal, a colossal fortress on the shores of the God's Eye. The project consumed enormous wealth and countless lives. Its walls rose higher than any other castle in Westeros. Its towers seemed designed to defy time itself. Yet Harrenhal revealed a truth that appears repeatedly throughout Westerosi history. Strength and permanence are not the same thing. Harren believed no enemy could breach his castle. In military terms, he was largely correct. A conventional army would have struggled enormously. But dragons altered every calculation. When Aegon Targaryen and Balerion the Black Dread arrived at Harrenhal in 1 AC, the castle's defenses became irrelevant. Dragonfire melted stone. Towers cracked and twisted from unimaginable heat. Harren and his sons died within the fortress they believed invincible. In the aftermath, the River Lords faced a choice. Among the first to support Aegon was Edmund Tully of Riverrun. While other houses hesitated, House Tully openly declared for the conqueror. The decision proved transformative. After the fall of Harrenhal, Aegon rewarded that loyalty by elevating House Tully above its rivals. Riverrun became the seat of the Lords Paramount of the Trident. A family that had once served stronger rulers suddenly found itself governing the entire Riverlands. The rise of House Tully reminds you that timing often matters as much as strength, and sometimes a single political decision can change the destiny of a dynasty for centuries. Why did House Tully rise while older and more powerful river dynasties faded into memory? The question lingers as the waters of the Trident spread beneath the moonlight. Riverrun sits where the Red Fork and Tumblestone meet, surrounded on 3 sides by rivers that become natural defenses when the waters rise. Compared to the colossal scale of Harrenhal or the ancient prestige of some neighboring houses, Riverrun appears modest. Yet history repeatedly rewards families that understand when to bend and when to stand firm. House Tully mastered that balance better than many of its rivals. Unlike the Starks, Arryns, or Lannisters, the Tullys never claimed descent from legendary conquerors who ruled entire kingdoms for thousands of years. Before Aegon's conquest, they were important bannermen, but not kings. Their authority extended over lands surrounding River Run rather than the whole Riverlands. Houses Blackwood, Bracken, Frey, Mallister, Piper, and Vance all possessed their own ambitions and ancient rivalries. Governing such a region required diplomacy as much as military strength. The Riverlands had always been a place where local loyalties ran deep and unity remained fragile. That challenge became especially clear during the reign of Lord Hoster Tully. By the late 3rd century after the conquest, River Run occupied a critical position in the politics of Westeros. Hoster arranged marriages that connected his family to 2 of the realm's most influential houses. His daughter Catelyn married Eddard Stark of Winterfell. His younger daughter Lysa married Jon Arryn, Lord of the Eyrie. These alliances were not merely family matters. They formed part of a network of relationships that would shape the future of the 7 kingdoms. When Robert's rebellion erupted in 282 to 283 AC, House Tully became one of its key supporters. The banners of River Run joined those of Stark, Arryn, and Baratheon against King Aerys II Targaryen. The rebellion succeeded, and the alliance that emerged afterward dominated the political landscape for years. Yet the Riverlands paid a recurring price for their central location. During nearly every major conflict, armies crossed their territory, fields burned, villages suffered, castles changed hands. The Trident often became the battlefield upon which the ambitions of distant kings were decided. No event demonstrates this more clearly than the War of the 5 Kings. After Eddard Stark's execution in King's Landing, Robb Stark marched south and crossed the Neck. River Run became one of his primary strongholds. Battles raged across the Riverlands. Jaime Lannister besieged River Run. Robb achieved victories at the Whispering Wood and the Battle of the Camps. Later, the catastrophe remembered as the Red Wedding unfolded at the Twins of House Frey. The tragedy destroyed much of the Stark-Tully alliance and altered the balance of power throughout the realm. The Riverlands teach a lesson that appears again and again throughout Westerosi history. Geography can be both blessing and curse. Fertile soil enriches a kingdom, but open terrain invites invasion. Strategic rivers facilitate trade, yet they also guide enemy armies toward your lands. House Tully survived not because it possessed overwhelming strength, but because generation after generation adapted to realities their ancestors could never fully control. Their story is one of endurance rather than dominance. As the rivers drift westward toward the sunset, another question emerges from the darkness. What truly made House Lannister powerful? Was it their immense wealth, the gold hidden beneath the hills of the Westerlands, or something deeper and more dangerous? The answer begins long before Tywin Lannister, before the Mad King, before even Aegon's dragons darkened the skies. It begins with one of the most famous tricksters in all Westerosi legend. The founder of House Lannister is remembered as Lan the Clever. According to the stories, he did not conquer Casterly Rock through brute force. Instead, he used wit, deception, and mischief. Some tales claim he infiltrated the stronghold of House Casterly and frightened its rulers into abandoning the castle. Others tell different versions of the same basic theme. The details vary, but the image remains consistent. While many dynasties celebrated warriors, the Lannisters proudly traced their origins to a man whose greatest weapon was his mind. Whether Lann the Clever existed exactly as the legends describe matters less than what the story reveals about the family's identity. Casterly Rock itself became one of the greatest fortresses in the known world. Rising above the Sunset Sea, it was not merely a castle built upon stone. It was carved into a massive rock formation, filled with halls, tunnels, mines, docks, and chambers accumulated over centuries. Travelers described it as almost city-like in scale. Combined with the vast gold and silver deposits of the Westerlands, the rock gave House Lannister resources few rivals could match. By the time of Aegon's conquest, the Westerlands were ruled by King Loren I Lannister. Faced with the threat posed by the Targaryens, Loren formed an alliance with King Mern the Ninth Gardener of the Reach. Together they assembled one of the largest armies ever fielded in Westerosi history. Contemporary accounts place its strength at more than 50,000 men. Against a conventional enemy, such a force might have proved unstoppable. Against dragons, numbers alone offered no protection. The confrontation that followed became one of the defining moments of the conquest. Known as the Field of Fire, the battle occurred in 1 AC when Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys attacked with Balerion, Vhagar, and Meraxes. Thousands of soldiers died in dragonfire. King Mern Gardener and many of his heirs perished. The Gardener dynasty ended in a single day. Loren Lannister survived and recognized that continued resistance would only bring further destruction. He submitted to Aegon and retained his position as Lord of Casterly Rock and Warden of the West. The decision preserved House Lannister when another ancient royal family vanished forever. It is one of the recurring patterns of Westerosi history. Houses that recognize changing realities often endure. Houses that mistake strength for invulnerability frequently disappear. The Lannisters lost a crown but kept their wealth, lands, and influence. Centuries later, those assets would allow them to become one of the most formidable powers in the realm. Why does Tywin Lannister cast such a long shadow over the history of his house? To answer that question, you must understand the state of the family before his rise. During the rule of his father, Lord Titus Lannister, powerful bannermen increasingly ignored Casterly Rock's authority. Debts went unpaid, insults were tolerated, rival houses sensed weakness. Tywin responded with relentless efficiency. As a young man, he crushed the rebellious houses Rhaen and Tarbeck. The destruction of Castamere became so famous that generations later the song "The Rains of Castamere" still served as a warning to anyone considering defiance. By the opening of A Game of Thrones, House Lannister stood at the height of its political influence. Queen Cersei sat beside King Robert Baratheon on the Iron Throne. Jaime Lannister served in the King's Guard. Tyrion Lannister moved through courts and castles with sharp intelligence hidden beneath a reputation many underestimated. Gold from the Westerlands flowed through the kingdom's economy. Yet beneath the appearance of absolute power, tensions already existed. Personal rivalries, hidden secrets, and competing ambitions were quietly accumulating. The Lion Banner looked stronger than ever, but history had shown many times that strength and permanence are not the same thing. The waves of the sunset sea crash softly against the cliffs beneath Casterly Rock. Beyond them lies darkness. To the south, storms gather over another ancient kingdom whose rulers claimed descent from heroes and gods. There, upon a rocky headland battered by wind and rain, stands Storm's End, and waiting within its walls is the story of a house that rose from conquest, inherited the legacy of fallen kings, and eventually seized the Iron Throne itself. Why did House Baratheon, a dynasty barely 3 centuries old, come to embody the legacy of kings whose line stretched back into myth? The question follows the sound of distant thunder across Shipbreaker Bay. Storm's End rises from the rocky coast like a challenge thrown against nature itself. Waves crash against its curtain walls. Storm winds howl around its towers. Rain lashes the stone with relentless force. Yet century after century the castle endures, as if daring the sea and sky to break it. The oldest stories claim that Storm's End was built by Durin Godsgrief, a legendary king who defied both gods and storms. Different versions of the tale survive. In one, Durin married Elenay, daughter of the sea god and the goddess of the wind. Furious at the union, her divine parents destroyed his castles repeatedly until a final fortress was raised that could withstand their wrath. Later traditions connected Bran the Builder to its construction. Whatever the truth, Storm's End became the seat of House Durrandon, the ancient Storm Kings who ruled the Stormlands long before dragons arrived. For thousands of years, the Durrandons fought nearly every neighboring kingdom. They battled the Reach, clashed with Dorne, and periodically expanded into the Riverlands. Their territory occupied a strategic position between several rival powers. Strong rulers could turn that position into an advantage. Weak rulers often found themselves fighting wars on multiple fronts, yet through victories and defeats alike, the crowned stag of House Durrandon remained one of the great symbols of pre-conquest Westeros. The final Storm King was Argilac Durrandon, remembered as Argilac the Arrogant. By the time Aegon Targaryen began preparing for conquest, Argilac faced growing threats from multiple directions. The histories describe negotiations between Argilac and Aegon concerning possible alliances and marriages. Those negotiations failed, tensions escalated. Eventually war became unavoidable. The ancient dynasty that had ruled Storm's End for centuries found itself confronting a power unlike anything Westeros had ever seen. When Aegon launched his conquest, in 1 AC, he entrusted one of the most important campaigns to Orys Baratheon. The exact origins of Orys remain uncertain, but many chroniclers believed he was Aegon's bastard half-brother. No definitive proof survives. What is certain is that Orys served among Aegon's closest companions and commanders. During the campaign against the Stormlands, he defeated Argilac in battle. The last Storm King died fighting, bringing an end to the Durrandon royal line. Yet something remarkable happened after the victory. Orys Baratheon did not erase the legacy of the defeated dynasty. Instead, he married Argella Durrandon, daughter of the fallen king. He adopted the crowned stag as his sigil and retained many Durrandon traditions. Even the words associated with House Baratheon reflected continuity rather than replacement. In many ways, the new dynasty inherited the identity of the old one. The name changed, but much of the political and cultural foundation remained intact. This raises an intriguing question. Did House Baratheon truly replace House Durrandon, Or did it quietly become its successor in almost every meaningful sense? When later generations looked at Storm's End, they saw the same castle, the same bannermen continued serving their overlords, the same regional traditions endured. Or as Baratheon gained legitimacy not only through conquest, but through integration. It was one of the most successful political transitions of the entire conquest. The centuries that followed produced several notable Baratheon lords, but none would eclipse Robert Baratheon. Born during the reign of Aerys II Targaryen, Robert spent part of his youth in the Vale under the guardianship of Jon Arryn. There he formed his famous friendship with Eddard Stark. Tall, charismatic, and immensely strong, Robert became admired by many contemporaries. His skill in battle earned widespread respect. Yet the qualities that made him a formidable rebel leader differed greatly from those required to govern a kingdom. When Robert's rebellion began, the Stormlands became one of its principal foundations. Robert won important victories despite suffering setbacks early in the war. At the Battle of the Bells, Loyalists nearly captured him in Stony Sept. Later, at the Battle of the Trident, he confronted Prince Rhaegar Targaryen directly. Robert's warhammer crushed the ruby-studded breastplate of the Crown Prince, sending rubies scattering into the river. The death of Rhaegar became one of the decisive moments in the fall of the Targaryen dynasty. In 283 AC, Robert ascended the Iron Throne. For the first time, House Baratheon ruled not merely the Stormlands, but the Seven Kingdoms themselves. Yet the transition revealed an enduring truth about Westeros. Winning power and maintaining power are different challenges. Robert excelled at the first. The second interested him far less. Administration often fell to Jon Arryn and later others within the royal court. Meanwhile, hidden tensions grew inside the kingdom's political structure. The story of House Baratheon after Robert's death becomes one of fragmentation. Stannis Baratheon claimed the throne as Robert's lawful heir, according to the rules of succession. Renly Baratheon advanced a competing claim supported by many powerful lords of the Reach and Stormlands. Joffrey Baratheon sat in King's Landing as king, though the truth of his parentage would become central to the conflict. In a single generation, the house that had united the realm became divided by competing visions of legitimacy and authority. As storms fade behind you, the landscape begins changing. Forests give way to rolling hills and fertile plains. Rivers move gently through green countryside. Orchards stretch toward the horizon. Vast fields of grain sway beneath the sunlight. This is the Reach, the richest and most populous region in Westeros, a land capable of feeding kingdoms and supporting immense armies. At its heart stands Highgarden, seat of a dynasty whose rise remains one of the most unexpected consequences of Aegon's conquest. Why did House Tyrell become rulers of the Reach when older and more prestigious families possessed stronger claims? To answer that question, you must first understand the dynasty that came before them. Before the dragons, the Reach belonged to House Gardner. The Gardners claimed descent from Garth Greenhand, one of the most famous legendary figures in Westerosi tradition. Countless noble houses of the Reach traced some portion of their ancestry to him, yet the Gardners stood highest among them, ruling from the beautiful castle of Highgarden. The Reach flourished under their kings, Fertile soil, favorable climate, and extensive trade routes made the region extraordinarily wealthy. Houses, Hightower, Redwine, Rowan, Oakhart, Tarley, Florent, and many others served beneath the Gardener kings. Their armies were among the largest in Westeros. Their lands produced enormous harvests. Their influence extended far beyond their borders. If an observer had been asked shortly before the conquest which kingdom seemed safest from extinction, many might have pointed toward the Reach. History, however, rarely asks permission before changing direction. When King Mern the Ninth Gardener marched to meet Aegon Targaryen at the Field of Fire in 1 AC, he led one of the greatest armies ever assembled in Westeros. Beside him stood King Loren Lannister and tens of thousands of soldiers. Before the battle ended, Mern and many of his heirs lay dead beneath dragonfire. In a single afternoon, a dynasty that had ruled for centuries vanished forever. And with its destruction, the future of the Reach suddenly became uncertain. Why did the Lords of the Reach accept House Tyrell when families such as the Hightowers, Florents, Redwines, and Rowans could claim older bloodlines and, in some cases, stronger hereditary arguments? The answer begins in the ashes of the Field of Fire. When King Mern the Ninth Gardener and many of his descendants died beneath the flames of Balerion, Vhagar, and Meraxes, the Reach suddenly found itself without a ruling dynasty. One of the most powerful kingdoms in Westeros had lost its royal family in a single battle. A vacuum emerged where authority had once seemed permanent. Into that vacuum stepped a house few would have predicted. House Tyrell had served as stewards of Highgarden under the Gardeners. Their position was respected, but they were not kings. When Aegon advanced after the Field of Fire, Harlan Tyrell opened the gates of Highgarden and surrendered the castle peacefully. The decision spared the Reach further devastation. Aegon rewarded that submission by elevating House Tyrell to the status of Lords Paramount of the Reach. Many powerful houses accepted the arrangement reluctantly. Some never entirely accepted it at all. The Florents, in particular, continued emphasizing their descent from Garth Greenhand and maintained that their blood claim exceeded that of the Tyrells. Similar arguments surfaced among other noble families from time to time. Yet legitimacy in Westeros rarely rests upon ancestry alone. Recognition matters, power matters, stability matters. Aegon had chosen House Tyrell, and over the following centuries, the Tyrells transformed that royal appointment into a durable political reality. No region in Westeros possessed resources comparable to those of the Reach. The fertile plains surrounding Highgarden produced immense quantities of grain, fruit, vegetables, and livestock. The Arbor, ruled by House Redwine, became famous for its wines. Old Town grew into one of the largest cities in the known world. The Citadel educated generations of Maesters. The Starry Sept had once served as the heart of the Faith of the Seven before the Great Sept of Baelor was constructed in King's Landing. Wealth flowed through the Reach like water through a river delta. As a result, the rulers of Highgarden often exercised influence that extended far beyond their borders. During times of war, the Reach could field enormous armies. During times of peace, its agricultural abundance supported trade throughout the continent. While the North relied upon endurance and the Westerlands relied upon mineral wealth, the Reach drew strength directly from the land itself. This distinction shaped the character of its ruling house. Tyrell influence often emerged through alliances, marriages, and diplomacy rather than sheer intimidation. By the time of A Game of Thrones, House Tyrell stood among the most powerful dynasties in the Seven Kingdoms. Lord Mace Tyrell governed the Reach. His mother, Olenna Redwine, known throughout Westeros as the Queen of Thorns, possessed one of the sharpest political minds in the realm. Sir Loras Tyrell became renowned as a gifted knight. Margaery Tyrell emerged as one of the most influential noblewomen of her generation. Together they represented a house that had converted opportunity into lasting authority. Yet beneath the beauty of Highgarden lingered an enduring insecurity. Unlike the Starks or Arryns, the Tyrells could not point toward thousands of years of unquestioned royal ancestry. Their legitimacy depended upon centuries of successful rule rather than ancient myth. That subtle difference helps explain why the Tyrells invested so heavily in relationships, alliances, and public perception. They understood that power must sometimes be reinforced continuously rather than inherited automatically. As the scent of orchards and blooming fields fades into the distance, the landscape changes again. Green plains give way to red mountains. Dry winds carry sand across rocky passes. The castles become fewer. The sunlight grows harsher. Ahead lies a kingdom unlike any other in Westeros, a land that resisted dragons, preserved unique customs, and entered the Seven Kingdoms not through conquest, but through negotiation. This is Dorne, and its rulers have always followed a different path. How did House Martell achieve what no other dynasty managed during Aegon's conquest? Survival without submission. The question carries you across the deserts and mountains of the south. Dorne differs from the rest of Westeros in geography, culture, inheritance traditions, and historical experience. While other kingdoms were shaped primarily by First Men and Andal influences, Dorne experienced a transformative arrival from across the sea. That arrival came centuries before Aegon was even born. Roughly 700 years before the conquest, according to the histories preserved in the world of ice and fire, a fleet carrying the Rhoynar crossed the narrow sea. Their leader was Nymeria, a warrior queen fleeing the expansion of the Valyrian freehold. The Rhoynar had once flourished along the great river Rhoyne in Essos. After devastating wars against Valyria, many survivors abandoned their homeland. Nymeria led thousands of them westward in a migration that became one of the defining events in Dornish history. When Nymeria arrived in Dorne, she forged an alliance through marriage with Lord Mors Martell. Together they united much of the region under Martell authority. The union transformed Dorne politically and culturally. Rhoynar customs blended with existing traditions. Women gained stronger inheritance rights than elsewhere in Westeros. Titles evolved. The rulers of Dorne became princes and princesses rather than kings and queens. Even centuries later, the influence of Nymeria remained visible throughout Dornish society. By 1 AC, Dorne stood apart from the kingdoms targeted by Aegon Targaryen. The Martells did not possess dragons. Their armies were smaller than those of the Reach or Westerlands. Their castles lacked the immense scale of Harrenhal or Casterly Rock. On paper, resistance appeared hopeless. Yet Prince Maria Martell viewed the situation differently. Elderly and blind, she reportedly answered demands for submission with characteristic defiance. Dorne, she insisted, would not yield. What followed became one of the most frustrating campaigns of Aegon's reign. Dragons burned castles and armies, yet Dornish forces avoided decisive engagements whenever possible. They relied upon mobility, local knowledge, fortified positions, and guerrilla tactics. Again and again, the invaders captured territory, only to lose effective control once they departed. The conquest that had succeeded elsewhere stalled in Dorne. Victory remained elusive. The most dramatic moment came with the death of Rhaenys Targaryen. During the First Dornish War, her dragon Meraxes was struck while attacking Hellholt, seat of House Uller. The exact circumstances remain uncertain, though the histories agree that a bolt pierced the dragon's eye. Meraxes fell from the sky and Rhaenys died as well. The loss shocked the Targaryens. For the first time, one of their dragons had been brought down in war. For the first time, the apparent invincibility of dragon power appeared vulnerable. Years later, after enormous costs on both sides, Dorne remained unconquered. The kingdom would not formally join the Iron Throne until 187 AC, nearly 2 centuries after Aegon's landing. The union came through diplomacy and marriage during the reign of Daeron II Targaryen. Prince Meryn Martell married Daenerys Targaryen, sister of the king. Through negotiation, Dorne obtained what armies and dragons had failed to achieve. It entered the realm while preserving many of its customs and privileges. The achievement reveals something important about House Martell. Unlike dynasties that measured success primarily through battlefield victories, the Martells demonstrated extraordinary patience. They endured pressure that would have broken many kingdoms. They survived dragonfire, invasions, and political isolation. Most importantly, they understood that independence and dignity sometimes require generations of persistence. The Sun and Spear banner endured because its rulers knew when to resist and when to negotiate. Far out beyond the western horizon, waves crash against black cliffs. Salt spray drifts through the darkness. The sea grows colder. There upon windswept islands, where priests drown men to bless them and reavers dream of ancient glory, another great house waits. The Krakens of Pike still remember a time before dragons, before kings, and before the Iron Throne itself. Why did the Ironborn continue chasing independence when centuries of history seemed to prove that every rebellion would end in defeat? The question rises with the sound of waves breaking against the jagged rocks of Pike. Unlike the fertile Reach or the vast north, the Iron Islands offer little comfort. Thin soil struggles to support crops. Storms batter the coastline. Fishing, trade, and raiding became necessities long before they became traditions. Life here taught harsh lessons, and over time those lessons shaped a culture unlike any other in Westeros. The Ironborn remember a legendary era known as the Old Way. In their songs and stories, reavers crossed the seas to seize wealth rather than earn it through labor. Warriors measured status through conquest. Captains returned from distant shores with treasure, salt wives, and glory. The priests of the drowned god blessed these traditions, reminding followers that what is dead may never die, but rises again, harder and stronger. Whether the reality ever matched the grandeur of the legends is another matter. Even so, the memory of that age continued influencing Ironborn identity long after circumstances had changed. Long before House Greyjoy became rulers of the islands, another dynasty expanded Ironborn power to extraordinary heights. House Hor controlled not only the Iron Islands, but also the Riverlands. Under King Harren Hor, known to history as Harren the Black, that power reached its peak. Harren spent years constructing the massive fortress of Harrenhal beside the God's Eye. The project consumed immense resources and demanded labor on a staggering scale. By the time it was finished, the castle stood as the greatest monument Ironborn rulers had ever created. Yet the very castle intended to symbolize permanent power became a warning about its fragility. When Aegon Targaryen arrived in 1 AC, Harren refused to surrender. Confident in the strength of his fortress, he withdrew behind its walls with his sons and retainers. Then Balerion the Black Dread descended from the sky. Dragonfire melted towers, fused stone, and transformed Harrenhal into a scarred monument visible centuries later. Harren and his heirs died within the fortress they believed unconquerable. The Hor dynasty vanished in a single night. After the fall of Harrenhal, Aegon faced the challenge of governing the Iron Islands. Rather than imposing a foreign ruler, he allowed the Ironborn captains and priests to choose a lord from among their own nobility. They selected Vicon Greyjoy of Pike. Thus, House Greyjoy became the new ruling dynasty of the islands. The decision provided stability, but it did not erase the cultural tension that would define Ironborn history for generations. Officially, the Greyjoys served the Iron Throne. Emotionally, many Ironborn continued dreaming of lost independence. The geography of the islands reinforced those dreams. The sea isolated communities from mainland influences. Old customs endured longer here than elsewhere. While the rest of Westeros increasingly embraced centralized royal authority, many Ironborn continued admiring reavers of the past. Lords might swear loyalty in public while privately celebrating ancestors who had spent their lives attacking neighboring coasts. This contradiction created a recurring pattern. Periods of peace gradually gave way to renewed calls for independence. No figure embodies that pattern more clearly than Balon Greyjoy. During the reign of Robert Baratheon, Balon declared himself king of the Iron Islands and launched a rebellion against the Iron Throne. At first glance, the decision appears reckless. The united strength of the Seven Kingdoms vastly exceeded that of the islands. Yet from Balon's perspective, the rebellion represented an attempt to reclaim what generations of Ironborn believed had been lost. The resulting conflict ended with defeat. Robert Baratheon, Eddard Stark, Stannis Baratheon, and other leaders crushed the uprising. The consequences shaped the next generation. Balon's son Theon Greyjoy was taken to Winterfell as a ward and effectively a hostage. For nearly a decade, he grew up among the Starks while remaining emotionally tied to Pike. His divided loyalties later became one of the most tragic personal conflicts in A Song of Ice and Fire. Through Theon, you see the broader dilemma facing the Iron Islands themselves. Were they part of Westeros or something separate? The question haunted both the individual and the culture. When the War of the Five Kings erupted, Balon again sought independence. Once more, he crowned himself king. Once more, Ironborn fleets sailed toward war. Yet even victories carried limitations. Raids could seize territory temporarily, but holding large portions of the mainland proved far more difficult. The old dream continued colliding with political reality. generation after generation, the islands confronted the same dilemma without finding a lasting solution. Still, it would be a mistake to view House Greyjoy merely through the lens of failure. Their persistence reveals something deeper about Westeros. Most great houses adapted themselves to changing circumstances. The Greyjoys repeatedly challenged those circumstances instead. Sometimes that resistance produced disaster. Sometimes it preserved identity. The Kraken banner endured because its bearers refused to forget who they believed themselves to be, even when history pushed them in another direction. As the sea stretches eastward, beneath a canopy of stars, another banner begins to emerge from the darkness. 3 red dragon heads upon a field of black. The image is younger than the dire wolf, younger than the falcon, younger than many royal dynasties it eventually overshadowed. Yet no house altered Westeros more dramatically than the family that carried this sigil. Their story begins not in Westeros at all, but across the narrow sea in a civilization now remembered only through ruins and legend. How did a relatively minor family from Valyria succeed where thousands of years of Westerosi kings had failed? The answer begins with catastrophe. Nearly 4 centuries before Aegon's conquest, the Targaryens were one of many Dragon Lord families within the Valyrian freehold. Valyria dominated much of the known world through dragons, military power, and sorcerous knowledge. Yet the Targaryens did not rank among the greatest Dragon Lord dynasties. They possessed influence but not supremacy. Their rise came because they survived an event that destroyed nearly everyone else. According to family tradition, Daenerys Targaryen experienced a prophetic dream foretelling disaster. Her father, Aenar Targaryen, acted upon the warning and relocated the family to Dragonstone, a volcanic island fortress in Blackwater Bay. 12 years later came the doom of Valyria. The details remain among the greatest mysteries in Martin's world. Mountains erupted, cities vanished, entire Dragon Lord bloodlines disappeared. The most powerful civilization of the age collapsed almost overnight. Because the Targaryens had already departed, they survived. For roughly a century after the doom, the Targaryens remained on Dragonstone. They controlled dragons and maintained their Valyrian customs, but they did not immediately conquer Westeros. Instead, they watched. Across the sea, the free cities developed their own destinies. In Westeros, the 7 kingdoms continued competing against one another. Then came Aegon Targaryen. Whether motivated by ambition, strategy, or, as some readers connect to later revelations, knowledge of a greater threat beyond the wall, he made a decision that changed history forever. Aegon did not invade alone. Beside him stood his sister wives, Visenya and Rhaenys. More importantly, beside them flew 3 dragons, Balerion the Black Dread, Vhagar, and Meraxes. Westeros had seen wars before. It had never seen anything like this. Ancient castles, proud dynasties, and centuries of military tradition suddenly confronted a form of power that rendered many assumptions obsolete. The age of independent kingdoms was approaching its end. Far below the shadow of those dragons, kings still ruled their castles, and armies still marched across familiar roads. Few yet understood that they were witnessing the final days of an old world. In the next part, the dragons will descend upon Westeros, and the fate of every great house will be changed forever. Did dragons create the 7 kingdoms, Or did they simply force together lands that had never truly learned how to coexist? The question hangs in the air as black wings pass across the dawn sky. Below, kings rule ancient realms that have fought one another for centuries. Above, Balerion, Vhagar, and Meraxes carry a family unlike any Westeros has ever faced. The castles, armies, and traditions of the continent remain formidable. Yet for the first time, they are confronted by a power capable of reshaping the political map in a single generation. Aegon Targaryen landed near the mouth of the Blackwater Rush and established the Aegon Fort, the settlement that would eventually become King's Landing. From there, he began a campaign that was military, political, and symbolic all at once. Some kingdoms submitted quickly, others resisted. The Riverlands threw off the rule of Harrenhal. The Vale bent the knee after Visenya's flight to the Eyrie. The Stormlands fell following the death of Argilac Durrandon. One by one, the old order began to unravel. Yet the conquest was never as simple as dragonfire overcoming resistance. Aegon understood the importance of legitimacy. Rather than replacing every ruling dynasty, he often preserved them. The Starks remained lords of Winterfell. The Arryns continued ruling the Vale. The Lannisters retained Casterly Rock. The Tullys and Tyrells were elevated, while House Greyjoy gained authority over the Iron Islands. In many ways, Aegon constructed a new political framework, using the pieces already present. The Iron Throne sat above the Grey Houses rather than eliminating them. One of the most important examples of this approach involved Torrhen Stark. By the time Aegon advanced northward, Torrhen had gathered a large army and crossed the Neck. Many northern lords expected a great battle. Instead, Torrhen studied the situation carefully. Reports from the south described what Dragonfire had done at Harrenhal and the Field of Fire. He understood that courage alone could not defeat dragons. After meeting Aegon, he submitted peacefully and became known thereafter as the King Who Knelt. For centuries, historians have debated Torrhen's decision. Some northern voices viewed it as a surrender of ancient independence. Others saw wisdom where critics saw weakness. Had Torrhen fought and lost, the North might have suffered devastation on a scale never before experienced. Winterfell could have burned. Thousands might have died. The Stark dynasty itself might have ended. Instead, House Stark preserved its lands, traditions, and authority for nearly 3 more centuries. The choice remains one of the most consequential acts of statecraft in Westerosi history. The Targaryen dynasty that emerged after the conquest was unlike any previous royal house. Its rulers sat upon the Iron Throne forged from the swords of defeated enemies. They practiced customs inherited from Valyria, including marriages between close relatives. They commanded dragons that gave them military advantages unmatched elsewhere in the world. Yet they also faced challenges no previous kings had encountered. Governing 7 culturally distinct kingdoms required more than fear. It required administration, alliances, compromise, and sometimes restraint. The reign of Jaehaerys, the first Targaryen, demonstrates this reality particularly well. Known as Jaehaerys the Conciliator, he ruled for more than 5 decades and worked extensively to strengthen the realm. Roads expanded, laws became more consistent. Relationships between the Iron Throne and regional powers improved. Queen Alysanne traveled widely and took interest in conditions throughout the kingdom. The stability achieved during their reign became one of the foundations upon which later generations relied. Their success came not primarily from dragon fire, but from governance. Yet another question soon emerged. What happens when a dynasty built upon dragons begins fighting itself? The answer arrived during the Civil War, remembered as the Dance of the Dragons. Beginning in 129 AC, after the death of King Viserys I, rival factions supported Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen and King Aegon II. Great houses across Westeros chose sides. The conflict engulfed castles, cities, and battlefields throughout the realm. Most importantly, dragons fought dragons. The consequences proved catastrophic. Vhagar, Caraxes, Sunfire, Meleys, Vermithor, Tessarion, and numerous other dragons participated in the war. Some died in battle, others perished through betrayal, accidents, or mob violence. By the conflict's end, much of the Targaryen dragon population had been destroyed. The dynasty survived, but the foundation of its extraordinary power had been severely weakened. Future Targaryen kings would rule without the overwhelming advantage that had once made resistance nearly impossible. The great houses adapted quickly to this changing reality. The Starks remained influential in the north. The Arryns continued controlling the Vale. The Lannisters expanded their economic power. The Martells still governed Dorne independently until its eventual peaceful union with the realm. As dragons disappeared, regional identities regained importance. The Iron Throne remained powerful, but its authority increasingly depended upon cooperation with the great dynasties rather than unquestioned military supremacy. Perhaps nowhere is this shift more visible than in the history of Dorne's entry into the realm. Nearly 2 centuries after Aegon's failed attempts at conquest, King Daeron II Targaryen achieved what dragons could not. Through marriage between Princess Daenerys Targaryen and Prince Meryn Martell, Dorne joined the Seven Kingdoms in 187 AC. The achievement illustrates a recurring truth. Political solutions often outlast military victories. A union secured through mutual agreement proved more durable than one sought through force. As the centuries pass, the dragon banners still fly above King's Landing, but their shadows grow shorter. The last dragon dies during the reign of Aegon III, according to the traditional histories. Targaryen kings continue ruling, yet they now depend increasingly upon diplomacy, alliances, and perceptions of legitimacy. Without dragons, they become more vulnerable to the same political pressures faced by every other dynasty. The transformation happens gradually, almost quietly. Then, generations later, a crisis emerges that threatens everything. Why did a dynasty that survived the doom of Valyria, united Westeros, and ruled for nearly 300 years ultimately collapse? The answer cannot be reduced to a single event. It involves the instability of Aerys II Targaryen, known to history as the Mad King. It involves the charisma of Prince Rhaegar. It involves the deaths of Rickard and Brandon Stark. It involves the friendships forged in the Vale between Robert Baratheon, Eddard Stark, and Jon Arryn. Most of all, it involves the breakdown of trust between the Iron Throne and the great houses whose loyalty sustained it. By the year 282 AC, many of the forces that would trigger Robert's rebellion were already in motion. The Targaryens still ruled. Dragon banners still flew above the Red Keep, yet beneath the appearance of stability, fractures had begun spreading through the kingdom. Ancient houses that had once accepted Targaryen leadership increasingly questioned it. Some saw tyranny, others saw incompetence, others simply saw opportunity. Soon those tensions would explode into a conflict that reshaped every great house in Westeros. The night deepens around King's Landing. Torches flicker along the walls of the Red Keep. Far away, banners stir in Winterfell, the Eyrie, River Run, Storm's End, Highgarden, Sunspear, Casterly Rock, and Pike. The realm still appears united, but beneath the silence, history is preparing to move once more. What does the fall of House Targaryen reveal about the true balance of power in Westeros? The question drifts through the darkness as the final years of the dynasty approach. For nearly 3 centuries, kings had ruled from the Iron Throne beneath the 3-headed dragon banner. Entire generations had grown up knowing no other royal house. Yet by the reign of Aerys II, the old relationship between crown and kingdom had begun to fracture. The great houses remained loyal, so long as they believed the monarchy served the realm. Once that belief weakened, the foundations of Targaryen rule became far less secure. The executions of Rickard Stark and Brandon Stark marked a turning point. Summoned to King's Landing after Brandon confronted Prince Rhaegar over Lyanna Stark, father and son expected justice according to the customs of the realm. Instead, Aerys ordered horrific punishments. Rickard died, attempting to save his son. Brandon strangled himself trying to reach him. The event shocked Westeros. Lords who might otherwise have remained neutral began questioning whether the king himself had become the greatest threat to the peace of the realm. When Aerys demanded the heads of Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon from Jon Arryn, he unintentionally united 3 major houses against him. The Arryns, Starks, and Baratheons entered open rebellion. House Tully soon joined through alliance and marriage. Across the continent, banners were raised and old loyalties tested. Some houses remained faithful to the crown. Others sided with the rebels. The conflict became a struggle not merely over a king, but over the nature of legitimate authority itself. The rebellion culminated in several famous battles. Robert Baratheon emerged as its dominant military figure. Jon Connington attempted to trap him at Stony Sept during the Battle of the Bells, but failed. Later came the Battle of the Trident, where Prince Rhaegar Targaryen met Robert in single combat. Amid the fighting, Robert's warhammer struck with devastating force. Rhaegar fell. The rubies from his armor scattered into the river and entered legend. With the crown prince dead, the fate of the dynasty became increasingly uncertain. The final collapse followed quickly. Lord Tywin Lannister arrived outside King's Landing with an army. Presenting himself as an ally, he gained entry to the city. The subsequent sack of King's Landing ended centuries of Targaryen rule. Aerys II died at the hands of Sir Jaime Lannister of the King's Guard. Princess Elia Martell and her children suffered a tragic fate that would echo through later generations. Viserys and Daenerys Targaryen escaped across the Narrow Sea. Robert Baratheon claimed the Iron Throne. Yet Robert's victory did not eliminate the importance of the great houses. In many ways, it highlighted it. The new king depended upon alliances with the Starks, Arryns, Tullys, and others. House Lannister gained enormous influence through the marriage between Robert and Cersei. House Martell remembered old grievances. House Greyjoy tested the strength of the new regime through rebellion. The kingdom appeared stable, but beneath that stability lay unresolved tensions inherited from both the rebellion and the centuries before it. Why did the Seven Kingdoms unravel so quickly after Robert's death? On the surface, the answer seems straightforward. Robert died in 298 AC. Questions about succession emerged. Rival claimants advanced competing rights. Yet beneath these immediate causes stood deeper structural realities. The great houses remained immensely powerful. Their armies, castles, wealth, and regional identities had never disappeared. The Iron Throne united them, but it never erased them. When Eddard Stark discovered the truth about the parentage of Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen, he confronted a crisis with enormous implications. According to the laws of inheritance, Stannis Baratheon possessed the strongest claim to succeed Robert, yet politics rarely follows legal logic alone. After Robert's death, Cersei Lannister moved swiftly to secure power for Joffrey. Eddard attempted a different course and paid with his life. His execution transformed a political dispute into a continent-wide conflict. The War of the Five Kings revealed the true strength and weaknesses of the major houses. Robb Stark was proclaimed king in the north by his bannermen. Stannis Baratheon asserted his lawful claim. Renly Baratheon gathered support from much of the Reach and Stormlands. Joffrey ruled from King's Landing under Lannister influence. Balon Greyjoy crowned himself king on the Iron Islands. Suddenly, the realm resembled the fractured political landscape that had existed before Aegon's conquest. Each claimant depended heavily upon the resources and traditions of his house. Robb drew strength from northern loyalty and the military reputation of House Stark. The Lannisters relied upon wealth, strategic alliances, and experienced commanders such as Tywin. Renly benefited from the support of House Tyrell and the resources of the Reach. Stannis possessed fewer men but emphasized legal legitimacy and disciplined leadership. Balon Greyjoy appealed to ancient Ironborn traditions. The conflict became a demonstration of how deeply regional identities still shaped Westeros. The Riverlands once again suffered terribly. Armies marched across them from every direction. Castles changed hands repeatedly. Villages burned. Riverrun endured sieges. Harrenhal shifted between competing factions. The central position that had troubled the region for centuries continued to bring hardship. In contrast, the Vale largely remained isolated under Lysa Arryn. The North fought for independence. Dorne watched cautiously from afar. Every region responded according to its own history and interests. One of the most striking aspects of the war is how often the great houses relied upon memories older than the Iron Throne itself. Northern lords remembered the kings of winter. Ironborn captains remembered the old way. Dornish leaders remembered resistance to dragons. Even houses fully integrated into the realm retained powerful regional identities. The Seven Kingdoms existed as a political unit, but beneath that structure survived older loyalties reaching back hundreds or even thousands of years. As the conflict spreads across castles, rivers, and battlefields, a larger question begins emerging from the chaos. Which house has truly shaped Westeros more than any other? Is it House Stark, whose roots reach into the Age of Heroes? House Arryn, whose Andal conquest transformed Southern culture? House Martell, whose alliance with Nymeria reshaped Dorne? House Lannister, whose wealth influenced generations of kings? Or House Targaryen, whose dragons united a continent? The answer is not as simple as it first appears. The wars continue, kings rise and fall, banners advance and retreat. Yet through all the turmoil, the great dynasties endure. Their castles still stand, their histories still guide them, their choices continue, influencing events long after individual rulers pass into memory. To understand Westeros fully, you must look beyond any single king or war and consider the long shadows cast by the houses themselves. In the final part, we will step back from the battles and ask which of these ancient dynasties left the deepest mark upon the world they helped create. Which great house truly changed Westeros the most? It is a deceptively simple question. At first, the answer appears obvious. Many would point immediately toward House Targaryen because dragons forged the Seven Kingdoms into a single political entity. Others would argue for House Stark, whose history stretches further into the past than almost any surviving dynasty. Some would choose House Martell for preserving Dornish independence, or House Arryn for helping spread Andal culture across southern Westeros. Yet when you step back and look across thousands of years, rather than a few generations, the answer becomes far more complicated. Consider House Stark. Long before the Iron Throne existed, the Starks shaped the identity of the North. Their authority survived the Andal invasions that transformed much of southern Westeros. They preserved worship of the old gods, while other regions embraced the faith of the Seven. Through figures such as Torrhen Stark, Cregan Stark, and Eddard Stark, they repeatedly influenced the wider realm without abandoning their distinctive traditions. Even in periods when the North remained politically distant from southern affairs, House Stark helped preserve some of the oldest surviving customs in Westeros. There's also a strong case for House Arryn. The arrival of the Andals ranks among the most transformative developments in Westerosi history. New religions spread, languages evolved, warfare changed, political structures shifted. While many Andal houses participated in that process, the Arryns became its most enduring symbol. Their conquest of the Vale created a foundation from which Andal influence expanded across much of the continent. Without that migration, the cultural map of Westeros would look dramatically different. House Martell offers another compelling answer. Through Nymeria and Mors Martell, Dorne developed along a path distinct from the rest of the Seven Kingdoms. Rhoynar traditions influenced inheritance laws, social customs, and political identity. Female rulers enjoyed greater acceptance. The title of Prince or Princess of Dorne reflected a separate historical evolution. Most remarkably, the Martells achieved peaceful entry into the realm after resisting military conquest for nearly 2 centuries. Their story demonstrates that cultural resilience can shape history just as profoundly as military victory. The influence of House Lannister emerges through different mechanisms. Gold from the Westerlands financed armies, marriages, debts, and political arrangements across generations. Tywin Lannister, in particular, demonstrated how wealth, reputation, and strategic calculation could become instruments of power equal to armies in the field. During the events of A Song of Ice and Fire, few houses exercised greater influence over the political life of the realm. Their impact was not rooted primarily in ancient legend, but in the practical realities of governance, economics, and statecraft. Yet it remains difficult to ignore the achievements of House Targaryen. Before Aegon's arrival, Westeros consisted of competing kingdoms with long histories of warfare. After the conquest, those kingdoms increasingly viewed themselves as components of a larger political system. Roads connected distant regions. Laws became more standardized. Trade expanded. The office of Hand of the King, the King's Guard, the Iron Throne itself, all emerged within the framework established by Targaryen rule. Even after the dynasty fell, the kingdom it created endured. At the same time, the history of Westeros warns against viewing any single house as the sole architect of events. The Seven Kingdoms function because many dynasties interact. The North cannot be understood without the Riverlands. The Riverlands cannot be understood without the Ironborn. The Reach influenced the Crown influenced Dorne, the Vale shaped Robert's Rebellion, the Stormlands produced kings. Again and again, history emerges from relationships rather than isolation. Perhaps that is the deepest lesson hidden within the stories of the great houses. Their banners differ, their customs differ, their ancestors worship different gods and tell different legends, yet none of them exists entirely alone. The Stark direwolf, the Arryn falcon, the Lannister lion, the Tully trout, the Baratheon stag, the Tyrell rose, the Martell sun and spear, the Greyjoy kraken, and the Targaryen dragon all derive meaning partly through their interactions with one another. Remove any one of them, and the history of Westeros changes. There is another mystery woven quietly through all these histories. Why do some houses survive while others vanish? The Gardeners disappeared at the Field of Fire. The Durandons faded into the Baratheons. The Horrors perished at Harrenhal. House Rayne vanished beneath the wrath of Tywin Lannister. Yet the Starks, Arryns, Martells, and several others endured for centuries, despite wars, rebellions, famines, invasions, and dynastic crises. Wealth alone cannot explain it. Military strength alone cannot explain it either. The surviving houses often share an ability to adapt without entirely abandoning their identities. The Starks bent the knee yet remained northern. The Martells joined the realm yet preserved Dornish customs. The Arryns navigated changing political realities while maintaining their ancient prestige. Even the Targaryens survived the doom because one family acted upon a warning when countless others remained where they were. Flexibility and continuity, held in careful balance, seem to matter more than raw power. As the years pass, individual rulers fade into memory. Castles weather storms. Great victories become songs. Great defeats become lessons. Yet the houses themselves continue moving through history like rivers across a landscape, altering their courses while remaining recognizably the same. Children inherit names older than kingdoms. Lords occupy halls built by distant ancestors. The past remains present in a way rarely seen elsewhere. Now the wars grow quiet, the banners lower, the sounds of marching armies fade beyond the horizon. Winterfell stands beneath the northern stars. The Eyrie rests high above the clouds. Riverrun watches its rivers flow. Casterly Rock faces the sunset. Storm's End listens to the sea. Highgarden sleeps among its gardens. Sunspear glows beneath the southern sun. Pike endures against the waves, and far away the Iron Throne waits within King's Landing, surrounded by the legacy of every house that helped shape it. The candle beside the old map burns low, Its flame flickers across rivers painted in blue ink, across black mountains and tiny castles drawn by a careful hand. The wind moves softly over the parchment just as it did at the beginning of our journey. It passes from the wall to Dorne, from the Iron Islands to the narrow sea, touching each kingdom in turn. The banners seem still now. The wars are over for the evening. Yet the names remain, lingering in the darkness long after the candlelight fades. Stark, Arryn, Tully, Lannister, Baratheon, Tyrell, Martell, Greyjoy, and Targaryen. The longer you spend in the history of Westeros, the harder it becomes to believe that the story is really about crowns. Kings sit upon thrones for a few years, or a few decades. Great battles fill songs for a generation. Victorious armies march across maps and then disappear into the earth. Yet the houses remain. Long after a king's name is forgotten by common people, the old castles still stand above their rivers, mountains, cliffs, and coasts. In Martin's world, power often appears to belong to individuals, but time reveals that it belongs more often to families, traditions, and memories carried forward by those who inherit them. What makes these houses fascinating is not that they are powerful. It is that each one represents a different answer to the same question. How do human beings survive the passage of centuries? The Starks survive through duty and continuity. The Arryns through legitimacy and tradition. The Martells through patience and cultural confidence. The Lannisters through wealth and political skill. The Greyjoys through stubborn devotion to identity, even when that devotion becomes self-destructive. Again and again, you find dynasties struggling against the same force. Not enemy armies, not dragons, time itself. That is why so many stories in Westeros carry a quiet sadness beneath their victories. Every great house lives in the shadow of those that came before. The Baratheons inherit the legacy of the Durandons. The Tyrells rise where the Gardeners vanished. The Targaryens survive only because countless other dragon lords perished in the doom. Every banner flying proudly above a castle exists partly because another banner once fell. The realm is built upon layers of forgotten kingdoms, forgotten rulers, and forgotten dreams. History never truly ends here. It simply accumulates. The Iron Throne itself becomes a symbol of this truth. At first glance, it appears to be the center of everything. Wars are fought over it. Families betray one another for it. Entire generations shape their lives around proximity to it. Yet when you look across the full sweep of Westerosi history, the throne begins to seem strangely temporary. The North existed before it. Dorne resisted it. The Vale, the Westerlands, and the Iron Islands all possessed identities older than it. Even the Targaryens, who forged it, eventually lost it. The throne claims permanence, but history quietly disagrees. Perhaps that is why the older castles feel so important. Winterfell survives because generations repair its walls. The Eyrie survives because sons inherit the responsibilities of fathers. Riverrun, Storm's End, Sunspear, Pike, Highgarden, and Casterly Rock all endure because human beings keep choosing to belong to something larger than themselves. Martin's world often appears cynical when viewed through its betrayals and wars. Yet beneath that surface lies a different idea. People are fragile, institutions are fragile, but memory can be astonishingly resilient. And so when you step back from the wars, from the dragons, from the crowns and rebellions and royal lineages, what remains is a continent defined by inheritance. not merely inheritance of blood, but inheritance of stories. Each generation receives an unfinished history and adds its own chapter before passing it onward. Some leave honor behind, others leave ambition, some leave wounds that never fully heal. Yet all of them contribute to the long river of memory flowing through Westeros. Now the night grows quiet once more. The armies have vanished into the darkness. The dragons are only distant echoes. The castles sleep beneath moonlight and stars, and on an old painted map resting beneath a fading candle, rivers curl across parchment in blue ink, mountains rise in careful black strokes, and the banners of the great houses stand motionless in the stillness, exactly where they were when this journey began